Jack Spade back here with the High Noon Leatherworks for another leather adventure. And today, part two of a pellet can holster or a snuff holster, whatever you want to use it for. I'm using it to hold my small game hunting pellets so I can carry them with me and I don't have to put them in my pocket. I'm going to wear them on my belt. So if you take a look at the last video, it was building this from a pattern that I made, and today we're going to do a little bit of carving and tooling on this. So I want to make it specific for this use, but you can put anything on it that you'd like. So come on in and let's get started. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is go ahead and remove my pellet can. And if you take a look at the first video, the last video that I put up building this, I made it out of Chicago screws. So I only had two fasteners. And I did it, instead of using rivets, I did it to make it to where I could take it apart. So I can pop that Chicago screw out of there. Then I can go back to this one that was underneath that and unscrew it and pop it out of there. And what that allows me to do is to go back and lay this flat so that I can do some carving on it. So here's the image that I'm going to do. That is an iguana. And I traced it on wax paper with a Sharpie, a black fine point Sharpie. Then I take that wax paper and I put box tape over the top of it. Doesn't matter as long as it's clear box tape. What that does is that allows me to use my stylus to go around that and transfer it to my leather. So I have my swivel knife and I'm going to use my stylus to do the transfer of the image. So what I'm going to do first is go ahead, I want the image on here. I made it big enough to where it would actually run off and around here. The tail will come around a little bit on the strap. So first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and case this with a little bit of water. So I'll moisten my sponge and case the leather. And normally I only case the area that I'm going to do, but I'm going to go ahead and case the whole thing so that if there's any color variations from the moisture, it'll be the same throughout. Sometimes I get them a little variation, sometimes I don't. So it just depends. So I'm going to keep that handy in case I need to redo that as I go through this. We'll go ahead and let that sit for just a couple of minutes, and while I'm letting that sit, I'll go ahead and I want to get this in the shot there, and I'll go ahead and take my jeweler's rouge and hit my stropping tool. And now that's prepped for keeping my swivel knife nice and sharp and polished. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. There we go. And then I'll try to keep showing you as I go the process or the progress that I'm making. Got that nice and polished and sharp. You can see how shiny that point is, or that tip is. It's a 3/8 swivel knife. So let's go ahead and place this where I want the image. And then I'll go ahead and hold that. You could tape it down if you'd like to your mat or your work surface. Again, that's personal preference. Or you can hold it. I prefer just to hold it as I transfer that image. And all I'm doing is outlining that. And then I'll use my pattern on my image later when I start doing my tooling to see where I need solid areas versus just an outline. So this is a fairly pointed stylus, and I am not pressing very hard. I'm just going over those marks so I know where I'm going to cut. Just take your time. And you don't have to press really hard on this. As long as you're holding that steady and it's not moving, that seems to be the key. So I'll just continue around that outline. Don't worry if for some reason you miss a line or part of a detail. You can go back and put your wax paper back on there and fix it. It's no big deal. And on these little spots that I have that are supposed to be scales, I'm going to do something. I'm going to try a little something when I do the tooling. We'll see if that works. Now I'm up into the face area, around the eye. And the mouth. I can hold that still and open that up. See if I missed anything that sticks out to me. It doesn't look like it. So it looks pretty good. So there's my outline of my image. And then what I'll do next is go ahead and take my swivel knife and I'll go ahead and start cutting all those lines with my swivel knife. Now you'll notice that tip is beveled, so that will spread those lines out as I cut them. Again, take your time, no hurry. I like to turn my piece to where it's nice and easy for me to draw my knife. Whatever's comfortable for you, that's what I would suggest. However, it feels comfortable for you to do it. But I would make sure as you go through this, make sure that your knife stays good and sharp and polished. And then you can go back to cutting. And you just follow those lines that you put in there with your stylus or whatever it is you use to do your lines with. And then keep your pressure on your knife. Try to keep it as consistent as possible so you don't get real deep areas and real shallow areas. Try to keep that consistent, and then what you'll end up with is a nice groove that you can go back and tool. Again, you notice I keep moving my piece. so that it's comfortable for me as I'm doing my carving. And you just want to make sure that you carve every line that's on there that you transferred. And again, if you get tired and you feel like you're pressing a little bit harder or not as hard as you were when you first started, stop, take you a little breather, and then start all over. Because you want that pressure nice and even. Alright, looks like that's all of my lines. Now you can see it's really starting to take shape. You can already see just from carving those lines that I've got a little depth in there. So now I can start my tooling, and I'm going to start with my beveling tool, and I want to move it very slightly, and you can see I'm not hitting very hard. And my beveling tool does have a little dot pattern on it, and that's what it looks like from the side. You can see it's got a beveled edge on it. So I'm taking the highest part, putting it on the edge, outside edge of my line, and I'm trying to keep it as straight up and down the tool as I can. I don't want to angle it to the left or the right. Go back up. And I'll just continue around I'm doing the outside of those lines that I just cut, those carved lines. And what this does is adds depth. Now, you'd want to make sure that as you're doing that, those lines or those bevel stamps that you're putting in there are overlapping each other. So you notice I'm not moving my beveler stamp very much at a time. I'm moving it side to side, very, very little, letting it overlap as I go. very little movement. Some of these smaller lines just barely touch those, like the ones for the claws, or the ones for the little spikes that come off of their back and their tail. Then I can go ahead and start. After I did the perimeter lines, now I can go ahead and start on the interior lines. And again, on this one, I'm keeping all my marks to the outside of those lines. You can do it however you'd like. Whatever you feel like gives you the best depth look, because that's what you're after. You're after that 3D effect. So you notice how I keep turning my piece that I'm working on. Make sure I've got all of my lines beveled here. And I am going to barely touch the ones for these spikes on his back. And that'll give that a little depth. So let me double check, make sure I've got everything here. Got just a spot there. And then you can see how that beveling, I turned that at an angle especially, you can see how that gives that some 3D depth. Now what I can do is I can take my background shader, and any of this that's background that you would see through as a background, you can use that You notice I don't know if you can see that or not, but I'm spinning it as I'm going through that background, and I'm not hitting it super hard. But you can see, like right here, where you'd see through to the background of whatever is in the background of the iguana. So I'm just flattening that out with that background tool. It gives it a little bit of texture and a little shade. I tell you what we can do. We can go ahead and take our can here and our stylus and just make us a little line where that would go around. And what that'll do is give us an area. You can see right here, that'll give us an area to background. And what that'll do is that'll totally change what that looks like, and it'll also make that iguana pop off of there even further, give it even more of a 3D effect. You notice I'm not hitting it hard at all. But I am trying to keep it as straight up and down as possible, just like when I did my beveling tool. Again, if you get tired, just stop, take you a little break. And I'm not leaving that touching my leather the whole time. I'm lifting that off and giving myself some space and easy to move that, so that when my mallet hits it, it's coming down and popping on that leather instead of it already sitting on that leather and just tapping on it. So I'm leaving that off of my leather just a hair, and when I hit it with my mallet, that's what's putting the consistent background image in there, my consistent pattern. And again, I like to turn my backgrounding tool and not leave it just one direction as I do my backgrounding. And when you get here to the spikes, that may be a little more difficult. Up here at the top, trying to do the wholesale area or the larger areas first. Then I'll work my way down toward the spike areas. And let me go ahead, I'll give you an idea of what that's starting to look like. You can see the backgrounding and That'll make that iguana or whatever it is you're putting in there even more 3D, or pop out a little more. Coming to the end over here on this side. So there's what I have so far with my carving and my beveling tool and then my backgrounding tool. Now, I said earlier I was going to try to use a tooling stamp for scales. You can see on here, see the dots? It's got some scales on it under its neck there. I'm going to use a cedar tool, and I'm going to keep it at an angle. So that I'm only hitting about like a half a circle. Notice I'm not hitting hard either. But look, it turned out just like I wanted it to. It's hard to see, but it actually turned out like it's got scales on it. So that's going to work out great. So I am done with the tooling part of this. I could go in and do some other cuts or whatever, but that's as far as I'm going to go on that, because I am going to come back and paint this with some acrylic. So that'll be the next video. But to finish this up this time, what I need to do is go ahead and dye it. So let me get that all set up, and I'll be right back. Alright, so I've got my dyeing set up here. I've just got a piece of old cardboard here. I'm using some Fibings Pro Dye. Saddle Tan is the color. I've got it in my dish here. Got a wool dauber. Just make sure that I get it covered evenly. And not too heavy. And then when I get to my artwork that I carved in there, I'm going to have to make sure that I get down in all the low spots. And I think, being the saddle tan, it's going to dry lighter than this, but with it being this color, I believe when I put the acrylic on there, that's really going to make it pop. So I've got my three-dimensional image there. Alright, so I'll go to the back. This is not as critical, but I'm still going to make sure that I get it covered evenly, because some of this does actually show. And this side will absorb a lot more dye than the finished side. So be prepared for that. Once I get that good and covered, I can go ahead and do the edges. And I am just using the dye for edges. I'm not putting any special treatment on the edge. In the last video I did burnish these edges. So I'll go ahead and complete that with my dauber all the way around. Come back to where I started from, and there's my completed dye job, front and back. You can see that it's already starting to lighten up where I started on the front, and this area will lighten up also as it dries. So we'll go ahead and let that dry on its own and just let it air dry. I don't like to force dry it with any heat or forced air or anything like that. I just let it dry on its own, and I can throw away all this. We'll let it dry, and then after it's dry, I'll come back and we'll put it back together and show you what it looks like at this point before we move on to the next video. So I'll be right back. Okay, so we're back and we're nice and dry. Turned out nice saddle tan color. And then here's the artwork that I used to do my transfer for my carving. And then there's my carving. So let's go ahead and put this back together at this point. And see how it looks. We're going to put our Chicago screws back through the inside just like we had them before. And then go ahead and put the straps around the back. Put that one in. Then we can go ahead and put our belt loop over the top of that. Put the second one in. We can go ahead and put our can back in. that did stiffen it up just a little bit, but it'll be fine. It'll loosen back up. So there's the carved and tooled image. And then next time, on the next video, come back and check it out. And we're actually going to use some acrylic, and we're going to add some color to this. So it should really pop when we get that color on there. And it looks good now, but when we get that color on there, it's really going to pop. Alright, so the second step of this process is done. The first video, which was the one before this one, if you check it out, shows actually making the holster. Then we've got our carving and our tooling done. Got our image in there. And then come back next week, check out the next step, next video, and we'll be laying some color on this, and it's going to make it look really good. So, appreciate you coming along, appreciate you watching, and like I always say, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.